Hey everyone, welcome back to Change Your Perspective, Change Your Awareness, Change Your Life. I'm Dr. Michelina AF, hashtag that felon doctor. And today we are talking about person versus person conflict. So this is usually like a person versus one other person, one-on-one conflict. If you're thinking about literature, if you're thinking about books, that's like Gatsby versus Tom, John Proctor versus Abigail. It's in your life, you versus one other person. So for me, this one is an interesting dynamic because you have a lot of power in this situation, mainly because if you shift, the dynamic has to shift, right? This one's an easy one to fix because if you show up differently, automatically the dynamic is going to shift. So I'll give you an example. I was in a relationship with somebody who had some very serious narcissistic tendencies a few years back. And what I did at first, when he would yell at me or like criticize me or like do anything I didn't like, he would big body me, which would be like coming up and like trying to intimidate me in my space. And I'm 5'2" and he was 6 foot. And I was like, what are you doing, bro? Like, knock it off. What I did at the beginning of the relationship was sit there and take it. At the end of the relationship, what I was doing was preserving my peace and protecting my power. And so I was like, listen, if you talk to me like this, or if you try to show up like this, I'm not going to stay in your like sphere of influence. I'm not going to stay in your vicinity. And he was like, So what I started to do was walk away. If he would shout at me, I would just leave the room. Like, you can shout all you want. I'm not going to listen to it. And when he would follow me, because they do, I would continue walking. And I eventually, I would lock myself in my car. I would sit in the driveway. I would go for a walk. I would physically remove myself from the situation until he learned, if you want my attention and energy, you're going to have to show up differently or I'm not going to give you it. Right? And that is the thing that is cool, actually, about a person-on-person dynamic conflict, if there's adversity, is that you can very radically shift it very quickly. Person versus person conflicts change when you show up differently. I'll give you another example. If you are feeling like you're in a situation where there's a lot of gossip happening, right? You and your best friend, maybe you're talking and you realize man, all we do is talk about other people. We don't really have conversations that are productive. What do we even talk about? You ever have that thought? What do I even talk to this person about? Usually, and I think maybe Eleanor Roosevelt said it, it's small minds talk about people, average minds talk about events, and advanced minds talk about ideas. There's a lot of truth to that. So if you're thinking about your sphere of influence, you're thinking about your circle of people, and you have a best girlfriend or a guy friend maybe, and all you do is talk about people. All you do is get together and you talk about girls, or you talk about guys, or you talk about your friends or your acquaintances from high school or whatever. Talk about this person or that person. What are you even doing, right? You can change the dynamic, and that's not necessarily a conflict, right? I'm just bringing up as an example. You can change the dynamic of it because you don't have to participate in that kind of conversation if you don't want to. This happened to me a lot when I was teaching in what are they called? Faculty lounges. I was I will not participate in you shit-talking children. That's weird to me. No, thank you. Not that I don't understand, because when you're a teacher, you work with the people you work with primarily are kids. So it's easy to get caught up in talking about them or gossiping about whatever or any of that, but it's not productive. So I physically remove myself. That's a little different because that's more person versus society. I don't want to get into it, but the idea is the same. The idea is that you can shift the dynamic person versus person very, very easily. So the thing that you need to be aware of is what are you bringing to the table? Where are you giving your power away, right? So this is a thing where it's so helpful to know your strengths and your weaknesses in a big way. Because if you know your strengths and your weaknesses, you'll know where your trigger points are. And I have a course that talks about triggers and things. It's acornsandoaks.vhx.tv, and it's the Overcoming Adversity course. Check it out. There's a whole lesson on how to identify triggers, overcome them, reframe, etc., etc. In a person versus person conflict, a lot of times the adversity rises from the fact that we get triggered by the way they show up. Person versus person conflict in my own life, I'll give you an example of, is people who operate very differently than me is a very hard thing for me to be in partnership with. So I have a person in my sphere of influence right now who doesn't know how to sort of set a deadline, doesn't know how to stay on time, doesn't know how to set a schedule, doesn't know how to operate from their thought life, and only operates emotionally. Their weaknesses are my strengths, and my weaknesses are their strengths. It's such a hard partnership because it's literally like what they excel at, I am terrible at, and what I excel at, they are terrible at. And so when we come together effectively, it's like a really beautiful, like, symbiotic marriage here. But when we don't, it's like a cataclysmic show of what the hell's going on, chaos. And so a lot of times, like, how I'll change that dynamic is to be more understanding. That's what I'll do, is I'm like, okay, let me understand it from their point of view. I can't think about it like, oh, they should have done it this way, because, like, no, they shouldn't have. That's not how they operate, and I know that, right? So no, of course they shouldn't have done it that way. Person versus person conflict can very easily be solved also when you, as the person, one party in the dynamic, tries to understand them and have compassion for whatever it is. That changes the game too, because now you're like, okay, now just because you understand it doesn't mean you have to deal with it. But it does change your energy in the thing. And that happens also with me too, is like, there was something that someone I'm close to was doing that really felt disrespectful, like really, really disrespectful to me. And I could not get past it until I kind of was like, well, why are they doing it? Like, why do they feel the need to do this thing? Like, what does this solve for them? What need is being met for them in this way that I obviously cannot meet? And as I started contemplating that, I was like, oh, like, I understand why they're doing this now. I don't like it, but I do understand it. And when I understand it, I can be a bit more compassionate and empathetic to what it is they're going through and why it is they're doing the things they're doing. So person versus person conflict shifts radically when you shift radically, because the other person has no choice but to change the way that they show up or lose you. And when you are willing to lose a person who's not treating you the way they should, there's a lot of strength in that. There's a lot of courage in that. There's a lot of power in that, right? And you know, we're always talking about here, taking your power back, standing in your courage, standing in your strength. Like, those are things that we're always talking about. And that's what we're here to do. So overcoming adversity helps you to do that when you overcome adversity successfully, intentionally, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, and let me tell you, I have coached this a whole hell of a lot, and I've done this in my own life, and it really does make a radical difference in the way you show up, because you're just like, why am I allowing this? And when you are intentional about things like that, the right people get attracted to you. And the people who are wrong, the people who are not the thing, the people who do not align, they fall away. It's like, very easy to see. Very easy to see when you get in that space. So yeah, I hope that is a helpful tutorial, a discussion, lecture on person versus person, so that you can show up differently in your relationships, you can handle adversity differently, you can transform, you can do all of these things that make you just a stronger, more courageous person. And we'll be talking about this all week, so I will keep bringing to you these conflict and resolution styles. And if you like what we're doing on the channel here, then subscribe, hit the bell, like, comment, tell your friends, grow the channel. And If you are interested in actually taking action on what it is that we're doing here, acornsandoaks.vhx.tv. We have courses there that will help you 10x process. And of course, I'll always bring you free content here on TikTok, on Instagram, and Facebook and LinkedIn and all over the place. So I will see you next time on the next video.